Tonight at 10, the SNP wins an historic fourth term in office. Nicola Sturgeon says she wants the Scottish people to have the right to choose their future. Celebrating victory, the First Minister says another independence referendum is the will of the country.
There is simply no democratic justification whatsoever for Boris Johnson or indeed for anyone else seeking to block the right of the people of Scotland to choose our own future.
But the UK government says a second referendum on independence would be irresponsible and reckless.
As we come out of the pandemic, it's the wrong time to have yet another divisive referendum and yet another bout of constitutional argument on a matter such as this.
We'll have the latest on the results in Scotland, England and Wales also tonight. Disruption continues on some of the UK's busiest rail lines. Passengers are advised not to travel tomorrow after cracks were found on some high-speed trains. A man in his 20s is held in connection with the murder of the police community support officer Julia James. And an undercover investigation. The Queen's cousin, Prince Michael of Kent, is secretly filmed talking about taking money from a prospective client for access to the Kremlin. Good evening. The Scottish National Party has won an historic fourth term in office, but has fallen short of an overall majority by just one seat. But there will still be a clear majority at Holyrood in favour of a second referendum on independence, with the Scottish Greens also backing a vote. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said another referendum is the will of the country, but Boris Johnson said allowing one would be irresponsible and reckless. With all the votes now counted, this is how the parties stand in the Holyrood Parliament. The SNP has gained 64 seats, up one from last time. The Conservatives are the second largest party, with Labour third and the Greens gaining 2 seats. Our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, is outside Holyrood for us this evening. Sarah.
And with those results, you can see how the constitutional battle lines are now going to be drawn. We've got Nicola Sturgeon declaring that as the people of Scotland have voted for parties who made a clear manifesto commitment to hold another referendum, then Boris Johnson has no democratic justification in trying to block that vote. While the Prime Minister is carefully not saying he will never allow one, but very firmly saying now is not the time. Across Scotland, victorious SNP candidates are celebrating increasing their vote and winning a remarkable fourth term in government. Cab Stewart became the first woman of colour elected to the Scottish Parliament.
Whilst I may be the first, I will not be the last.
And with a pro-independence majority in that Parliament, Nicola Sturgeon says Westminster cannot stand in the way of another referendum.
All of this risks treating voters in Scotland and our entire democratic process as if they simply don't matter, like they are just a sideshow. Voters are not a sideshow. It is you, not me, not Boris Johnson, not any politician, but you who are the people who matter. There is simply no democratic justification whatsoever for Boris Johnson or indeed for anyone else seeking to block the right of the people of Scotland to choose our own future.
Alexander Burnett, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
When the Tories held on to Aberdeenshire West, the SNP's hopes of an outright majority were extinguished. Scottish Conservatives campaigned saying a vote for them would stop another independence referendum, and now say it's time to move on.
We need to focus on the issues that will secure Scotland's recovery, and that really is important for people's jobs, for young people's education, for investing in our NHS after everything they've done over the last year to get us through this pandemic. There's so many issues that we really should be putting to the very top of the agenda in Scottish politics in the next Scottish Parliament, but it seems all we're speaking about yet again is another independence referendum.
The pro-independence Scottish Greens increased their seats to 8, and say the Prime Minister cannot ignore a result that's delivered a mandate for another referendum.
I think the position of the UK government is actually verging on being dangerous here. They're essentially saying to the people of Scotland there is no democratic path to to allow them to make the decision about their own future, and relying instead merely on legal technicalities rather than on any form of political legitimacy.
But Boris Johnson has made his position clear, telling the Daily Telegraph, "I think a referendum in the current context is irresponsible and reckless." We could soon be looking at a constitutional standoff between Edinburgh and London, so what might happen next? Well, if Westminster does refuse to grant the authority for another independence vote, then the SNP plan to legislate for one here at Holyrood anyway, and dare the Prime Minister to take them to court if he wants to try to establish that the Scottish Parliament can't have a referendum without his permission. None of that will happen soon. The new SNP government will prioritise COVID and the recovery for the next few months, before they make any moves to try and fulfil their manifesto promise to give voters in Scotland a choice over whether they want to leave the United Kingdom. Tonight, the Prime Minister has written a letter to Nicola Sturgeon congratulating her on her victory and saying that as the United Kingdom is facing unprecedented challenges, he is inviting her and the Welsh First Minister, Mark Rakeford, to a joint summit meeting to discuss how their governments can work together to overcome some of these shared challenges. Although he does also say in that letter he exceeds that they may not always agree, which is maybe a bit of atypical understatement from the Prime Minister there tonight.
Sarah Smith, thank you. In Westminster, the focus will now turn to how the Prime Minister responds to the SNP's victory. Meanwhile, after disappointing results in council elections in England, Labour has fared better in contests for mayors. But the Conservatives are continuing to pick up support in what were once Labour strongholds. Here's our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, and her report contains some flashing images.
Can they shake on anything now? If the argument over Scotland's place in the United Kingdom will be settled, only one of them can win. In Edinburgh, she'd like another vote on independence, but Parliament in Westminster would say no.
This is not the time to be talking about a second referendum, to be getting into divisive and distracting constitutional wrangles. We should put all of our energy right now into tackling the pandemic.
But with peach papers and ballots piling sky high for the SNP, voters granted them a record-breaking fourth term in charge in Scotland, with powers over health, education and much else. But it's their desire for Scotland to be an independent country that puts them at odds with the unionist parties and the Tories, who in this unusual and eventful set of elections have dominated count after COVID-secure count in England. Across a big landscape, picking up seats in Rotherham in Yorkshire, even Durham, holding on to the West Midlands mayor, where Labour had hoped for a chance. Some of the Labour family prospered though. In Wales, the party successfully kept control of the Senedd and Cardiff. And after a long wait, London's City Hall looks secure again for Labour. Sadiq Khan, the mayor, there for another 4 years.
For the Labour Party,
they took the mayor's office in the west of England, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough too. There was no sign of Keir Starmer today though, after a battering in much of England.
I declare that Andy Burnham...
And there were warnings from those who kept parts of the north deep red, who might one day just want his job.
If I can help Keir and the party as we go forward, of course I will do that. But it does mean change. Let's not, get away from that. Labour has to change. Labour has to get rid of its London-centric ways. And if it doesn't, I don't know what the future holds for it.
What is already happening tonight in Labour is bewilderment and anger. News leaking out that Angela Rayner, the member's elected deputy, has been stripped of her role running campaigns. More changes are likely tomorrow. Yet in the fight between England's towns and cities, England's Tories and Labour, it's the Conservatives again and again who've come out on top this time. But winning England isn't winning the whole country. And once again, a Conservative Prime Minister faces demands from an administration in Edinburgh to grant another vote on independence. Neither side wants to rush headlong into a bitter clash over the Constitution. But these results leave the status quo deeply uncomfortable. And Boris Johnson will face calls, not just to say no to independence, but to try to prove why, in his view, the UK works. Technically, legally, It is the UK government's right to accept or reject a request for another independence vote. But that's not the same as sentiment. And this isn't disappearing.
The power to choose our own future must lie in the hands of the Scottish people.
The question was, remember, asked and answered 7 years ago. The resident in this place has no appetite to allow it to happen again. Yet resistance from Downing Street could fracture the flag still further. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Labour's best performance in Thursday's elections came in Wales, where it has won 30 of the 60 seats in the Senedd election, just short of an outright majority. The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, has promised to be radical and ambitious. Our Wales correspondent, Howard Griffith, reports.
After Super Thursday's success, a soggy Saturday celebration. Mark Drakeford was front and centre of Labour's campaign in Wales. And it worked, equalling their best ever result here. A very different story to other parts of the UK.
Well, I think the difference between Wales and England is that people in Wales can see the record of a Labour government. They can see what we have achieved together over the period of devolution, and they know that if we say something in our manifesto, then they can have confidence that it will be delivered.
After 2 decades in government, many within Labour expected their grip on power in Wales to loosen. Instead, the pandemic has flipped convention on its head, and it's the incumbents who've come out stronger.
Especially in places like Porthcawl. 18 months ago, voters in this constituency kicked out their Labour MP. But in this election, they stuck with the party. And that seems to be largely down to trust in its leader.
Mark Drakeford has done very well this year, you know, with this pandemic and everything else he's had to deal with.
Well, he's come across clearly and said what we want to hear and what we were going to do. I think people have thought he's handled that very well too.
That popularity will be tested by what lies ahead. Rebuilding the NHS and restoring the economy all require tough financial decisions once the victory parade has run its course. Howell Griffith, BBC News, Porthcawl.
Well, some of the results in the local council elections in England are still coming in. This is how they currently stand. Labour has lost control of 6 councils, while the Conservatives have made 12 gains. With votes happening across Scotland, Wales and England, Rita Chakrabarti looks at some of the key areas that have determined the outcome.
In Scotland, the focus had been on whether the SNP could gain an overall majority. They didn't manage to. They gained these 3 seats. They took East Lothian from Labour. They took Ayr from the Conservatives, and they took Edinburgh Central from the Conservatives, a big gain there. But there was evidence elsewhere in other marginal seats that they were targeting of tactical voting by unionist voters to keep the SNP out. So they had a strong night, but did not get their overall majority that they were aiming for. Now, in Wales, the story is a very Labour-focused one. Labour had a very good night. It equalled its previous best of 30 seats in the Senedd. There had been a lot of focus on whether the Conservatives could gain seats from Labour. They did manage to gain the Vale of Clwyd, and they also took Brecon and Radnorshire from the Liberal Democrats. But that surge that we saw from the Conservatives in 2019 in the general election didn't happen. Labour managed to gain Rhondda from Plaid Cymru, and that was a big gain for them, a big swing from Plaid. Now, in England, there's been a whole host of local elections, and here the story has been of a very strong Conservative performance. Conservatives gaining seats all over England, including Cannock Chase, which has never been Conservative before. But you can also see, conversely, Labour had a bad night of it. They lost Harlow to the Conservatives, and they lost Southampton to the Conservatives. There was a crumb of comfort in the mayoral elections, though, for Labour. Here you'll see rather more red on the board. They held Doncaster, Liverpool, Salford, amongst others. And in the west of England, they gained the mayoral seat from the Conservatives.
Rita Chakrabarti there. Well, let's talk to our political editor, Laura Koonsberg. And Laura, questions about the union coming to the fore again now.
Yes, certainly, Sophie. I mean, there is a real fault line now that stretches from London to Edinburgh and back again. Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon are totally at odds over whether or not there should be another referendum on Scottish independence. Nicola Sturgeon will point to her pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. She's making accusations that Boris Johnson is anti-democratic for suggesting that it just can't happen. But on the unionist side, you know, they'll point to the fact that she didn't make that very high bar of a majority on her own. Figures, including her, promised the vote would be once in a generation when it happened just 7 years ago. And remember too, while the Parliament is very much pro-independence, the SNP completely dominant there, the public is pretty much exactly 50-50. And both sides, the Conservatives, the Unionists and the SNP, all do agree on one thing, that now isn't the moment. Boris Johnson's going to phone Nicola Sturgeon to offer his congratulations tomorrow. That's going to be the start of what could be a very tricky conversation.
And questions too tonight about the Labour Party, the direction it's going.
That's right. I mean, Labour had a drubbing on day one of results, but some better signs today, whether that was in Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, where they took the mayor, or a really good performance in Wales. But Keir Starmer has, I have to say, completely flabbergasted and astounded some of his colleagues tonight by stripping his deputy, Angela Rayner, of her role as chair of the party. Why does that matter, given that yesterday he was on the airwaves saying we have to change, we have to do things differently, we have to show we're a different party? Well, it matters because she's a popular figure with members, and she's somebody that's popular with other MPs. She's somebody also from the north of England, exactly where he says the party has to reach out and connect with. And while he did promise change, this isn't exactly the kind of thing that many in the Labour Party had imagined. So rather than concentrating on decent or better results today, instead Labour is already breaking out tonight in an argument about the way forward.
Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg in Westminster, thank you. Major disruption on some of the UK's busiest rail lines will continue tomorrow after cracks were found in some of the high-speed trains. It's thought 180 trains made by Hitachi had to be taken out of service. Great Western Railway and London North Eastern Railway have advised passengers not to travel tomorrow, and they've warned that disruption could continue next week. Katie Austin's report contains flashing images.
These high-speed Hitachi 800 series trains weren't running this morning. They needed to be kept back for inspections after thin cracks were found in some, as the boss of Hitachi Rail told me.
It's actually on the metal that links the body where the passengers sit with the underside of the train, the bogie, which is what it actually runs on. And so that area is critical for the operation of the train. And so just to make sure that we are very safe, we took that decision to withdraw the trains while we just made sure that we fully understood the situation and that it is actually safe for the trains to operate with passengers running on them.
That led to major disruption on Great Western Railway, LNER, TransPennine and Hull trains.
It's a disaster for me because I'm actually going for my vaccine in Cardiff, and my appointment's at 3 p.m.
I was going to go back to uni to Exeter and I can't go back, which was so annoying.
These are fairly new. They've only been on UK railways for a few years. Since last night's discovery, checks have revealed similar cracks in further trains, although Hitachi won't say precisely how many.
The trains that have been withdrawn are all the same design, and so that is the primary focus right now, is to look at that design and to ensure that we fully understand the cause, and then also to make sure that we can, as quickly as possible, fix them and make them available back into traffic again.
Today, some have been cleared for use and put back into service, but LNER has advised customers against travel tomorrow. Great Western Railway expects disruption into next week. Hitachi has apologised to passengers and rail operators. It's not clear yet when all the trains will be ready for use again. Katie Austin, BBC News.
A man in his 20s has been arrested in connection with the murder of Julia James, a police community support officer who was found dead in woodland near her home in Kent. A property in nearby Aylsham is being searched. Helena Wilkinson reports.
11 days ago, Julia James took her dog for a walk. A short time later, she was attacked and killed a few hundred yards from her home. Her body was found on the edge of this woodland. Today came confirmation of a development in the case. In a statement, Kent Police said A man in his 20s who is from the Canterbury area was arrested by officers at 9:30 last night and he remains in custody. The man is a British national. Today, in the village of Aylsham, a house was searched by police. Forensic officers were seen going in and out of the property, which is about a mile from where the body of Julia James was found. Despite an arrest, detectives still need the public's help for information. This morning, the MP for Dover and Deal and the leader of Dover District Council paid their respects to the community support officer. Her family want answers as to what happened to Julia, who they say was fiercely loyal and loved with her whole heart. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
The latest government figures show there were 2,047 new COVID infections in the past 24 hours and 5 more deaths have been recorded. More than 35 million people have now had their first jab. That's nearly 67% of the UK's adult population. And more than 17 million people have had both jabs, meaning almost a third of adults are now fully vaccinated. At least 30 people have been killed and more than 50 injured in Afghanistan in an explosion outside a secondary school in the capital, Kabul. Many of those who died were schoolgirls who had just finished class and were streaming out of the gates at the time of the attack. Secunda Kamani's report contains some distressing images.
Panic, fear and bloodshed outside the school gates. The explosions took place just as students were making their way home. Many of those killed, girls and young women. Inside a hospital, relatives search body by body for their loved ones. Whilst outside, a desperate wait for news. Oh my God, this woman cries. 2 of my daughters were studying there. One of them is injured, the other is missing. The Islamic State group is likely to be behind the bombing. Although less powerful in Afghanistan than the Taliban, their attacks here are typically even more brutal, and they've repeatedly targeted this community, Afghanistan's Shia Hazara minority. Violence has been flaring across the country, with the Taliban stepping up assaults on the Afghan government, whilst US and international troops begin a final withdrawal. In this latest atrocity, so many lives cut far too short, and for those who've survived, an increasingly uncertain future. Secunda Kamani, BBC News.
An undercover investigation by the Sunday Times and Channel 4 dispatches has covertly filmed the Queen's cousin, Prince Michael of Kent, talking about taking large sums of money from a prospective client for access to the Kremlin. Here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
He is His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent, a first cousin of the Queen. He's not a full-time working royal and does not receive any funding from the public purse. Prince Michael does, however, have long-standing cultural and other links with Russia, and it was supposedly to take advantage of those links
as a royal member
that 2 people posing as representatives of a South Korean company dealing in gold set up a remote meeting with the prince. In reality, they were reporters for the Sunday Times and Channel 4. They hoped the prince could open doors for them in the Kremlin. The fee they offered the prince for a speech was a generous one.
How about the fee, $200,000 that we have offered? Was it acceptable, sir?
Oh, yes, very much so. Thank you. Yes, indeed. Very good. Thank you so much. Yes.
Is it in line with what you normally charge for a speech like this, sir?
Yes, indeed. So I have no questions for you on that. I'm very happy with your suggestion.
In a statement, Prince Michael's office said he hadn't met President Putin since 2003. His representative, the statement said, had made suggestions that Prince Michael would not have been able to fulfil. Buckingham Palace declined to comment. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
With all the sport now, here's Ollie Foster at the BBC Sports Centre.
Hi there, Sophie. Some of you might be waiting for Match of the Day after the news to see if the Premier League title has been decided, or I could tell you now.
Manchester City aren't champions yet. They needed to beat Chelsea to win the league, and though they took the lead, they lost 2-1 in injury time at the Etihad Stadium. They still have 3 games left to secure the 3 points required, but could also win the title tomorrow if Manchester United lose at Aston Villa. We've had 3 other results in the Premier League. The reigning champions Liverpool beat Southampton 2-0. They're up to 6th. There were also wins for Leeds and Crystal Palace. It was all about the relegation battle on the last day of the Championship season, and Wayne Rooney's Derby County have stayed up at Sheffield Wednesday's expense. Wednesday took the lead twice, but it finished 3-3. Martin Waghorn with his second of the game from the spot. The draw was all Derby needed. Wednesday dropped down to League One, along with Wycombe and Rotherham. If you're in Scotland, cup highlights follow the news, but stay there if you want to know what happened in the first of the semi-finals. Hibernian beat Dundee United 2-0 to reach the Scottish Cup final for the first time since they won it back in 2016. They'll return to Hampden Park in a fortnight to face either St Mirren or St Johnstone, who play their semi tomorrow. Lewis Hamilton's going to start on pole for the 100th time in tomorrow's Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona. World champion was 0.03 of a second quicker in qualifying than his title rival Max Verstappen. After 3 races, Hamilton leads the Red Bull driver by 8 points. Bristol Bears are sure of a place in the playoffs in the Rugby Union Premiership. The leaders trailed their local rivals Bath at half-time, but roared back to win by 40 points to 20. Max Malin scored 2 of their tries. There are also wins for Gloucester, Exeter and Newcastle. We've had the last of the quarter-finals in Rugby League's Challenge Cup. Hull FC beat Wigan 20 points to 10, but it was much tighter in the other quarter. Castleford needed extra time to get past Salford. Gareth O'Brien's golden point drop goal saw them make it through to the semis, 19-18. Finally, the British fighter Billy Joe Saunders has a world title fight in the early hours tomorrow morning. You can follow that on the BBC Sport website with commentary on Radio 5 Live. But that's all your sport. Sophie.
Ollie, thank you. And that's it from us. Tomorrow morning, Nicola Sturgeon and Michael Gove will be on the Andrew Marr Show. That's at 9 a.m. on BBC One. But from us, good night.